Grace checked into the luxurious Grand Meridian Hotel, her designer luggage rolling smoothly behind her, and decided to unwind at the hotel bar that very first night. The moment she entered, her eyes fell on the bartender, a man in plain jeans, a red t-shirt, and a blue plaid shirt over it. She didn't recognize him, and immediately her arrogance took over. She began mocking him, loudly criticizing his appearance in front of all the guests, demanding that he change his clothes or be fired, insisting she couldn't relax in the same room with someone so beneath her. At the peak of her tantrum, Ryan excused himself to take a phone call, and for a brief moment, Grace had a moment of quiet, unaware of the shock that awaited her. The next day, Grace discovered the truth, and her world seemed to crumble. The bartender she had humiliated in front of everyone was not just any employee. Her mind raced, her face went pale. Every insult she had thrown, every order she demanded, now felt heavy on her conscience. But this was only the beginning of a story full of shocking twists, unexpected justice, and moments of reckoning that would change everything she thought she knew. What happened next would leave everyone stunned. But before we continue, make sure to subscribe to the channel. Now let's see how this story really began. The Grand Meridian Hotel in Charleston shimmered under the soft glow of evening lights, its marble facade gleaming like a promise of perfection. Grace Whitmore's Mercedes purred to a stop at the valet, and she stepped out, her designer heels clicking against the pavement with precise, almost ceremonial rhythm. Her luggage, a collection of polished leather and satin-lined cases, was carried by uniformed attendants who moved with practiced deference. Grace's eyes scanned the entrance, her expression taut with anticipation and entitlement, her lips pressed into a line of expectation. Every detail mattered. Each scent, each sound, each arrangement of flowers was a reflection of her standards, and she did not tolerate deviation. Inside the lobby, the soft strains of jazz floated through the air. Grace frowned at the elevator music, twisting her perfectly manicured fingers. "This is too ethnic," she muttered, louder than necessary, and a nearby guest could not help but glance up, eyebrows raised. She waved at a passing concierge. "I need orchids. Fresh, not those tired roses." Surely, a hotel of this caliber can accommodate such a simple request. The concierge bowed slightly, nodding, but Grace barely registered the gesture, already scanning the grand staircase and the polished bar in the distance. That evening she descended to the hotel's celebrated bar, the Amber Lounge, expecting the kind of seamless elegance that matched her own meticulously curated image. The ambient lighting highlighted the rich tones of mahogany and brushed brass, the air carrying a hint of citrus and the soft aroma of aged oak barrels. Patrons sipped cocktails with relaxed sophistication, laughing quietly over conversations that floated like music across the room. But Grace's attention was singular, focused entirely on what she assumed would be a scene worthy of her own presence. Behind the counter stood Ryan Carter, his presence calm, understated, yet commanding in a way that did not demand notice. He was 30, black, dressed in faded jeans, a red t-shirt, and a royal blue plaid shirt layered casually over it. There was no attempt to dazzle. His strength lay not in appearances, but in the warmth of his demeanor. The precision of his hands as he mixed drinks, and the effortless way he drew laughter from an elderly couple seated nearby. Ryan offered a gentle, teasing smile as he added a pinch of something to their cocktails. "Just a secret ingredient," he murmured with a wink. "A pinch of kindness." The couple laughed heartily, the room rippling with genuine warmth that needed no pretense. Grace froze as her eyes fell upon him, her face twisted, a mixture of incredulity and revulsion. "Excuse me," she snapped, loud enough that every head in the bar turned toward her. "Is this some kind of joke? A bartender dressed like a homeless person in a five-star hotel?" Her words, sharp and dripping with derision, cut through the ambient music like a blade. Ryan looked up, his smile faltering for the briefest heartbeat before he steadied himself. His eyes, dark and steady, met hers with a mixture of patience and quiet resolve. "Good evening, ma'am," he said evenly. "What can I get you tonight?" Grace's voice rose, slicing through the calm like lightning. "What you can get me is a manager. Immediately. I refuse to be served by someone who looks like he wandered in from a Goodwill donation center." The other patrons shifted uncomfortably, a young couple at a corner table exchanging horrified glances as the tension thickened like a heavy fog. "Ma'am, I apologize if my appearance," Ryan began softly, the calm in his tone an anchor amidst her storm. "Your appearance?" She laughed, a sound brittle and harsh. "Honey, this isn't some dive bar in the projects. Either you change into something respectable, or you get fired. Actually, you know what? I want you gone. Tonight." Ryan's jaw tightened imperceptibly, the storm behind his eyes restrained with formidable discipline. He did not raise his voice, did not bend to her cruelty. Instead, he offered measured words, firm but composed. "I'm happy to have someone else assist you," he said, the subtle dignity of his tone rendering her words almost hollow. Grace scoffed, her contempt unmistakable. "Happy? The only thing that would make me happy is watching security drag you out." Ryan's phone buzzed quietly in his pocket. He glanced at it, excusing himself. "Excuse me for one moment." He set down the shaker and walked toward the back, leaving Grace to simmer in her self-righteous fury. Finally, she muttered, snapping her fingers at another staff member, "Get me a martini, and make sure that man doesn't come back." Her voice carried entitlement and disdain, yet she did not notice the hotel manager, Patricia, observing silently from the shadows, eyes wide with fear and helplessness. The next morning, Grace lounged by the pool, recounting her victory to her friend Meredith over the phone, her tone triumphant. "Should have seen his face, Mer. These people need to know their place." The sun glinted off the water, but Grace remained oblivious to the quiet, simmering power beneath the surface, the patience of someone who had endured indignities she could never comprehend. A bellhop approached nervously. "Miss Whitmore? The general manager requests your presence in the conference room. Immediately." Grace rolled her eyes, expecting apologies and perhaps some compensatory service. She followed, her every step heavy with assumed dominance. She pushed open the conference room door and froze. Her blood ran cold. Sitting at the head of the table was Ryan Carter, now clad in a tailored charcoal suit, the soft light catching the precise cut of his jacket. Behind him, a massive portrait adorned the wall. Ryan Carter, founder and CEO of Meridian Hospitality Group. For the first time, Grace saw no warmth in his eyes, only quiet, devastating calm. The calm of a man who had seen exactly who she was and refused to be broken by her cruelty. Grace stood frozen in the doorway, her Louis Vuitton clutch slipping from her trembling fingers. It hit the carpet with a muted thud, yet the sound echoed inside her chest like a crack spreading through glass. Her breath caught, shallow and uneven, as if her lungs were refusing to cooperate with the reality unfolding before her eyes. Ryan didn't rise. He didn't even blink. He simply lifted a hand, a quiet, controlled gesture toward the chair across from him. "Please," he said softly, though the softness held weight. "Sit." The room felt unnaturally still. The curtains were drawn halfway, letting in a slanted beam of morning light that revealed the faint tremor in Grace's knees as she forced her legs to move. Patricia, the hotel manager, stood near the window, arms rigid at her sides, gaze fixed on a point far away, as though looking at Grace would scorch her. Grace sank into the chair as if gravity had doubled. Her voice, when it emerged, cracked with disbelief. There must be some mistake. You were the bartender." The final word came out too loud, like she was trying to convince herself more than him. Ryan clasped his hands on the table, his posture steady. "I was helping my team," he said quietly. Marcus's daughter had emergency surgery. He needed to be with her. So I filled in. His tone carried no accusation, no anger, just fact. But that simplicity made something twist painfully inside Grace's chest. She blinked rapidly, her mind racing in frantic circles, grasping for an escape route that no longer existed. Well, how was I supposed to know? You were dressed like what, Miss Whitmore? Ryan asked, his voice still calm but no longer soft. There was steel now, coiled and unmistakable. Like someone unworthy of basic respect? The silence that followed felt suffocating. It pressed against the walls, seeped into the air, tightened around Grace's throat. She opened and closed her mouth twice, but no sound came out. Ryan reached for a leather folder and flipped it open with controlled precision. I've reviewed the security footage from last night. Every word you said was recorded. Every guest in that bar witnessed your behavior. Grace's face drained of color so quickly she seemed to fold inward. Her fingers curled around the hem of her dress, knuckles turning white. I'm sure we can work something out, she whispered. I'm a very influential guest. I've stayed at Meridian Properties for years, 7 times, Ryan corrected without hesitation. And according to staff reports, you filed 23 complaints, demanded that 14 employees be disciplined, and reduced 3 housekeepers to tears. One tear slipped down Patricia's cheek. She wiped it quickly, hoping no one noticed. Grace swallowed. Her throat felt scorched, dry, shrinking. Her reputation, her shield was slipping. And she could feel the cold exposure of her own actions staring back at her like a mirror she'd spent years avoiding. Ryan closed the folder gently, but the sound might as well have been the slam of a gavel. Here's what's going to happen. Her breath hitched. You have 2 hours to vacate the premises. Your membership to all Meridian Properties is permanently revoked. Grace lurched to her feet, voice rising into a panicked screech. You can't do this. Do you know who my father is? He'll destroy you. He'll, Harold Whitmore, Ryan said calmly. Real estate developer. Currently under investigation for tax fraud, if I'm not mistaken. He lifted a brow, the faintest trace of pity crossing his expression. I don't think he's in a position to destroy anyone. Grace recoiled as if slapped. Her hand flew to her mouth, but not fast enough to hide the small sound that escaped, a desperate, wounded sob she couldn't swallow in time. Ryan rose slowly, buttoning his jacket. His movements were quiet, dignified. He looked at her, not with anger, not with triumph, but with something that made her stomach twist. Human disappointment. I built this company from nothing, Miss Whitmore, he said. I worked 3 jobs to put myself through Cornell. I slept in my car for 6 months while saving for my first property. And I did it while people like you told me I didn't belong. A tear slipped down Grace's cheek. She wiped it away with the back of her manicured hand, furious at herself for showing it. Ryan walked toward the door. Before opening it, he paused. His voice softened again, but not for her comfort, for truth. The difference between us? He looked over his shoulder. I never let their cruelty make me cruel. Patricia's chin trembled. Grace stared at her shoes. Security escorted Grace from the room an hour later. Her designer luggage was piled on the sidewalk with none of the ceremony she believed she deserved. Her hair clung limply to her temples, her mascara smudged beneath her eyes like bruises of her own making. But humiliation has a way of fermenting into something darker. As she waited for her car, she pulled out her phone, hands shaking with rage. Meredith? She hissed into the receiver. It's me, I need a favor. That bartender? The one who thinks he's somebody? I'm gonna make him regret the day he was born. Her voice cracked, not with fear, but with vindictive resolve. Grace didn't notice the bellhop behind her, lifting her bags into the trunk. She didn't see the look he exchanged with another employee. She didn't hear the faint buzz from his phone. But the message had already been sent. The socialite just got banned for racism. Want the story? It was addressed to his cousin at the Charleston Post, and by nightfall, the city would know everything Grace tried to hide. 3 days later, Ryan sat in his sleek, minimalist office in Atlanta, the hum of the city below a distant pulse beneath the quiet of the room. His eyes were fixed on architectural renderings of a new property he planned to open in Savannah, a space meant to honor his father, to bring dignity, comfort, and opportunity to a neighborhood that had given him so much. The blueprints, detailed with the precision of someone who measured more than space, measured dreams, weighed against reality. Yet even as he studied them, a small knot of unease had settled in his chest, though he tried to ignore it. The knot came sharp, insistent, and Derek, his assistant, appeared in the doorway, urgency written on his lean features. Without preamble, he held out a tablet. "Boss, you need to see this." Ryan frowned and took the device, swiping the screen to life. The words leapt at him with a kind of ferocity that made his stomach turn. Meridian Hotel CEO. Accused of inappropriate conduct, former guest speaks out. The headline was bold, accusatory, and searingly public. His heart sank as he read the details. Grace Whitmore, in a carefully orchestrated statement to the press, claimed that Ryan had made unwanted advances toward her, that she had been banned because she had rejected him. Every word landed like stones thrown into a still pond, sending ripples of disbelief and indignation through him. "She's lying," Ryan said quietly, the tightness in his voice betraying the storm behind his calm. His hands gripped the tablet a little too firmly. "We have footage proof." Derek's expression tightened. "The footage only shows the bar area," he said grimly. "She's claiming the incident happened in a private hallway." The edge of worry in his tone made it clear that this was more than a rumor, it was a viral storm brewing. One that could engulf everything Ryan had built with so much care and sweat. Within hours, the story spread like wildfire. Hashtags trended, tweets dissected, debated, and magnified every fragment of accusation. Sponsors and partners began calling, their voices polite but brimming with anxiety. Ryan felt the weight of their hesitation, not for himself, but for the people who relied on him. The employees whose livelihoods could tremble with the slightest ripple of bad publicity. His phone buzzed. It was his mother, Lorraine, checking in from their family home in Savannah. "Baby, I saw the news," she said softly, worry threading her tone. "You know Mama doesn't believe a word of it, but people are talking." "I know, Mama," Ryan replied, closing his eyes for a brief moment, inhaling slowly. "I'll handle it." The words sounded more resolute than he felt. As night fell, Ryan remained alone in his office. The city lights sprawled beneath him, sparkling and indifferent, as if mocking the storm consuming him. He stared at them, trying to anchor himself. His mind wandered to his father, who had spent 30 years as a hotel janitor, never missing a single day, never letting pride dictate his dignity, teaching Ryan that the world could strip away titles and money, but it could never touch character. "You always said the truth has long legs, Pop," Ryan murmured, almost to himself. "I hope you were right." The faintest echo of a memory stirred. His father standing at the end of a long hallway, broom in hand, eyes steady, voice calm. "Do what's right, son. People will see it. Eventually." Meanwhile, in Charleston, Elena sat at the small kitchen table of her apartment, the morning sunlight filtering through blinds, making lines of shadow across her worried face. Her hands trembled as she scrolled through the news on her phone, each word another small earthquake shaking her fragile sense of safety. She had been there that night. She had seen everything. Heard Grace's slurs, witnessed Ryan's calm, unwavering composure in the face of blatant cruelty. Her heart ached with the memory, the coldness in Grace's laughter, the venom in her tone, but also with the strange, growing warmth, the silent strength that Ryan had exuded. And yet fear gnawed at her from the inside. Elena was undocumented. Her life, her family, everything she had worked toward could crumble if she spoke. And yet the injustice gnawed harder. As she watched the lies spread across social media, the headlines twisting her memory of the night, something inside her began to shift. She remembered the look in Ryan's eyes when he calmly asked her to continue serving, never belittling her, never showing disdain, only grace. And she realized that hiding, remaining silent, would allow the lie to grow, to suffocate the truth completely. With a trembling breath, she reached for her phone. Her fingers hovered over the contacts until she found the number she had found online, the Charleston Post. She dialed it, hands shaking, heart racing like a trapped bird. "Hello?" A voice answered on the other end. This is Elena," she whispered, voice barely audible. Her words were tentative, fragile, but underneath them a fierce determination pulsed. I was there. I saw everything. I can tell you the truth." She paused, drawing a deep, steadying breath, feeling the weight of fear and courage balancing precariously in her chest. "Please, you need to hear it. You need to tell it, right?" For the first time since the scandal began, Elena felt something she had not expected. Hope. It was tentative, like sunlight breaking through storm clouds, but it was real, and it was enough to give her courage. In Atlanta, Ryan remained unaware that the first flickers of the tide were turning in his favor. In Charleston, the truth had found a quiet, unwavering vessel, a witness willing to risk everything to restore what was right. Somewhere in the hum of servers and the glow of screens, the first threads of justice began to weave themselves. And though Ryan didn't yet know it, the storm would not last forever. Patience, persistence, and the quiet dignity his father had instilled in him were still on his side, waiting for the right moment to rise. Elena hung up the phone, her hands trembling but her heart lighter. The lie would be challenged. The truth, like water finding its level, would find its way. And somewhere, in a quiet room in Atlanta, Ryan Carter would soon feel the first whisper of vindication. Grace basked in the glow of what she believed was her triumph. Floating from interview to interview with the performative grace of someone who had rehearsed every breath, every blink, every inflection. The cameras adored her, or at least she thought they did. Under the bright studio lights, she tilted her chin just enough to catch the flattering angles. Her designer blouse chosen deliberately to evoke vulnerability. "He's a predator hiding behind a smile," she told a morning show host, her voice trembling on cue as she dabbed theatrically at the corner of her eye with a tissue she didn't actually need. "Someone needs to stop him." The host nodded sympathetically, unaware or unwilling to question the script playing out before him. Grace exhaled softly, soaking in the validation like warm sunlight. She imagined Ryan watching this, imagined his world collapsing, imagined herself victorious, powerful, finally receiving the attention she believed she deserved. But as the interviews rolled on, small fractures began to appear, delicate at first, like hairline cracks in a piece of porcelain. Cracks that deepened with every replay, every scrutinizing pair of eyes, every expert who dared to look more closely. A forensic analyst invited onto a competing network leaned forward in her chair and calmly dismantled Grace's timeline. The alleged location has full 24-hour camera coverage. Reviewing the footage, there is no interaction matching her description. In fact, Mr. Carter is not seen in that hallway at any of the times she mentioned. The words hit social media like sparks on dry tinder, igniting threads of skepticism. Grace's supporters pushed back, but the certainty was no longer absolute. Doubt had slipped in, uninvited, unwelcome, and unstoppable. Then came the Charleston Post article, anonymous but piercing. A quiet voice speaking truth with more strength than any network could manufacture. "I watched her call him names I can't repeat," the article read. "He never raised his voice, never lost his dignity. She was the monster, not him." Elena's testimony, though unnamed, carried an authenticity that no performance could overshadow. Her words painted Grace not as a wronged woman, but as a bully, a liar, A storm of entitlement lashing out at someone who had refused to bend. More witnesses began to come forward, one by one, not loudly, not dramatically, but steadily, like a tide turning. The elderly couple who had been seated near the bar wrote a statement describing the exchange, recalling the way Grace had sneered, the way Ryan had kept his composure. A businessman who had recorded part of the confrontation released the grainy footage, showing Grace leaning toward Ryan, her voice sharp, even though the words were not clear. Ryan's posture was calm, hands at his sides, his expression controlled but pained. The public began to shift. Grace's publicist called her in a breathless panic. "We need to get ahead of this. Maybe a charity appearance, a statement about emotional stress?" "Shut up!" Grace screamed, hurling her phone across the room. It struck the wall with a dull thud before falling to the carpet. "This isn't over. I'll find something. Everyone has secrets." Her voice cracked with frustration, but underneath it was a tremor of fear. The fear of losing control. The fear of being exposed for what she truly was. Her mind raced. If she couldn't tear Ryan down with accusations, she would dig deeper. She would find something. Something dark. Something she could twist. She hired a private investigator with a reputation for uncovering the things people preferred to bury. 3 days later, the PI arrived with a thick folder under his arm. Grace snatched it eagerly, her pulse quickening, but the man didn't release it immediately. "The guy's clean," he said finally, his tone reluctant. "Volunteers at homeless shelters. Pays for employees' kids to go to college. Even bought his janitor father a house before he died." Grace felt the heat of anger rise to her cheeks. She flipped through the file anyway, searching for something, anything, that could be weaponized. Her jaw tightened. "There has to be something," she hissed. "Well?" The pie shifted uncomfortably. "There's one thing. His business partner, Victor Wynn, he runs the investment side of Carter Properties. Rumor is he's been skimming funds. Nothing proven, but there are whispers." Grace paused. Slowly, a smile unfurled across her face, a smile that held no warmth, only calculation. "Find me everything on Victor Tynes. Every rumor, every unpaid bill, every questionable decision." She leaned back, confidence returning like a mask slipping into place. "If I can't destroy Ryan directly, I'll destroy what he built." The PI nodded, though even he looked vaguely uneasy. Grace didn't notice. She was too wrapped in her own determination, too intoxicated by the idea of victory. What she failed to realize, what she could not have known, was that Ryan had already discovered Victor's betrayal. He had been quietly gathering evidence for months, waiting for the moment to confront the man he once trusted. Grace, in her desperation, was stepping onto a path already rigged to expose corruption, just not Ryan's. As she plodded, believing she was tightening a noose around Ryan, she was unknowingly pushing events toward a truth that would eventually collapse around her. A truth with long legs, as Ryan's father would have said, legs that were already walking in her direction. Ryan sat at the head of the long conference table, a place he never particularly liked, though it had become the command center of his life these past few days. Legal documents were spread out in front of him, ledgers, emails, flagged transactions, and internal memos that painted a picture far uglier than he had anticipated. The air felt heavy, saturated with exhaustion and the quiet dread of truths finally surfacing. His lead attorney, a meticulous woman with silver-rimmed glasses and a calm voice that never seemed to waver, tapped a highlighted line on a financial statement. "He's embezzled nearly $2 million, she said, her tone clinical, though there was unmistakable disappointment there too. Victor covered his tracks well, but not well enough. "We can prove it." Ryan leaned back, rubbing both hands over his face. He could feel the ache behind his eyes, the ache of betrayal, of disbelief, of carrying a company on his back, while one of the people he trusted most hollowed it from the inside. If this goes public during the scandal, she continued, it could tank the company's stock. Investors are already skittish. I won't protect a thief to save my reputation, Ryan murmured through his fingers. It wasn't anger that colored his voice, it was sorrow. The kind that comes when someone you once shared dinners and long strategy meetings with turns out to be chiseling away at the foundations you built together. There might be another way, Derek said gently. He'd been standing by the door, tablet tucked against his chest, eyes moving between Ryan and the legal team like a mediator. What if we control the narrative? Get ahead of it. If we release everything ourselves, it won't look like we're scrambling. It'll look deliberate, transparent. Ryan opened his mouth to respond, but his assistant, Paige, appeared in the doorway. Her expression was tight, strangely formal. Mr. Carter, you have an unexpected visitor. Ryan frowned. Now? Paige, she said it was urgent. Paige stepped aside. A woman in her 60s entered the room with the kind of presence that made everyone sit up a little straighter without quite knowing why. She was elegant, in the old money, understated way that didn't require labels or jewelry to announce itself. Her posture was erect, her chin high, her eyes sharp as polished glass. Mr. Carter, she said, her voice smooth but carrying an undercurrent of steel. I'm Vivian Ashford. I believe you know my daughter. The temperature in the room seemed to drop a few degrees. Ryan's eyes narrowed. Grace's mother. The same. She didn't wait to be invited before taking a seat. It was not rudeness, merely the habit of a woman who'd long grown accustomed to rooms rearranging themselves around her. I'm here because my daughter is about to ruin our family's name. What's left of it? And I refuse to let that happen. Ryan rested his palms on the table, lacing his fingers. With respect, Mrs. Ashford, your daughter already tried to ruin my name. I know. Vivian's gaze softened, but only slightly. I also know she's lying. I raised a monster, Mr. Carter. I enabled her cruelty because it was easier than confronting it. That ends today. Derek shifted uncomfortably, and even the lawyer looked uncertain. Vivian placed a folder on the table and slid it toward him. Her hand didn't tremble, but her eyes, those betrayed her. This is everything. Her previous lawsuits, the NDAs she's signed, the witnesses she's paid off, every pattern, every manipulation, every claim she's fabricated. Ryan looked at the folder, then at her face. The pain there was subtle, buried deep, but palpable. A mother mourning the child she had failed to guide, yet finally choosing truth over loyalty. Why? He asked softly. Vivian exhaled, and for a moment, the polished mask slipped. In its place was a woman worn by memories. Because 40 years ago, I was a housekeeper at a hotel in Manhattan, she said. A guest accused me of stealing her bracelet. I was fired, blacklisted. It took me 5 years to recover. She blinked, and the glimmer of tears caught the light. I married into money and forgot where I came from, watching my daughter become that same guest. It's a mirror I can't look away from anymore. The room went silent, enveloped in the weight of her confession. Ryan's throat tightened, not with pity for Grace, but with something like empathy for Vivian. For the way pain could echo through generations if no one stopped to break the pattern. He reached for the folder, but not before extending his hand to her. Thank you, Mrs. Ashford. She hesitated only a fraction of a second before taking it. Her grip was firm, grateful, resolute. When she left, Derek waited until the door closed before letting out a low whistle. Well, that was not on my bingo card. Ryan didn't smile, but something in his posture eased, not relief exactly, but clarity. He looked down at the folder, then at the framed photo on his desk, his father in his janitor uniform, standing in front of the First Meridian property, with pride stretching wide across his face. A reminder of the values that built everything Ryan now carried. We're going to give Grace exactly what she wants, Ryan said quietly. A public stage. And then we're going to let the truth speak for itself. Derek nodded slowly, absorbing the words. But what Ryan didn't say, what he didn't yet know how to put into words, was the growing awareness that something else was shifting beneath the surface. Victor knew. Victor had been tipped off, and a desperate man cornered by exposure could become unpredictable, dangerous. The storm ahead wasn't just about scandal anymore. It was about survival, of reputation, of legacy, of integrity. And the first crack of thunder had already sounded. Grace Whitmore sat in her penthouse apartment, the city lights of Atlanta flickering like distant fireflies against the darkness outside her floor-to-ceiling windows. The phone rang, jolting her from the hollow echo of her own thoughts. She frowned at the unknown number, the digits unfamiliar, and hesitated before answering. "Miss Whitmore?" "This is Victor Hine," the voice said, smooth, urgent, practiced. "Ryan Carter's business partner. I think we can help each other." Grace's pulse quickened. She perched on the edge of her cream velvet sofa, clutching the phone as if it were a lifeline. "Go on," she whispered, her voice a mix of caution and anticipation. Victor's words were precise, strategic, almost like a dance. "Ryan's a fraud," he said, letting the syllables hang, deliberate. "He's been cooking the books for years. I have proof. But I need someone with media connections to break the story." Grace felt the familiar rush, that intoxicating blend of power and vindication. Her eyes gleamed, reflecting the city lights, her mind already racing through headlines, interviews, and viral clips. "And in return?" she asked, her voice edged with steel. "I disappear with my share before the whole thing collapses," Victor continued, his tone smooth, unflappable. "You get your revenge. Everyone wins." Grace leaned back, closing her eyes briefly, savoring the imagined triumph. She didn't question why a business partner would betray his CEO. She didn't ask for verification. She didn't pause to consider the subtle dangers. Opportunity was all she saw. "Get me the documents," she said, the words slicing the air with finality. "I'll make sure the world knows who Ryan Carter really is." What Grace didn't know, and could not possibly know, was that every word she spoke, every detail she revealed, was being captured. Ryan had orchestrated this encounter from the start. Victor, desperate and polished, was wearing a wire. Each syllable, each promise, was being recorded, catalogued, and preserved for the reckoning to come. Across town, Elena sat on the edge of her small bed, trembling hands hovering over the envelope that had arrived just that afternoon. She recognized the handwriting instantly, familiar yet comforting. Ryan's careful, deliberate script. Her eyes blurred with tears as she read the note inside, the words heavy with sincerity and gratitude. "Your courage saved more than my reputation. It reminded me why I do this. If you ever need anything, a lawyer, a job, a friend, I'm here." Arlena clutched the check for $50,000 as if it were a lifeline, her fingers digging into the paper until it crumpled slightly, tears soaking the corners. She sank against the wall, sobbing quietly, the weight of fear, relief, and validation colliding in her chest. In that small apartment, amidst the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sounds of the city, Elena felt seen. Finally, someone had noticed her courage, had honored it. Meanwhile, Ryan drove down the quiet streets of Savannah, the humid night air pressing against the windows of his car. He was tired in a way that reached deep into the bones, a fatigue not of body alone, but of spirit. The exhaustion of carrying responsibility, the burden of truth. When he arrived at his mother Loren's house, she was waiting in the doorway, arms open. Concern etched across her warm, familiar face. "You look tired, baby," she said, pressing a plate of cornbread into his hands, the aroma a comforting balm against the chaos of his mind. "I'm fighting ghosts, Mama," he admitted, his voice low, almost brittle. "People who want to tear down what we built." Lorraine took his face gently in her hands, her touch steady and grounding. Your daddy used to say, the oak tree doesn't argue with the wind. It just keeps growing. You keep growing, Ryan. The storm will pass. He leaned into her embrace, inhaling the faint scent of lavender and home. For the first time in days, maybe weeks, he felt a seed of strength settle in his chest, quiet, patient, persistent. The hug lingered, wordless but profound, a transfer of resilience from one generation to another. The following morning, the world continued to turn, indifferent to the battles waged behind closed doors. Grace Whitmore stood before the press, a poised figure in designer silks, her voice confident as she announced shocking revelations about Meridian hotels. Cameras flashed, reporters leaned forward, eager for scandal, and the crowd murmured with anticipatory excitement. She didn't notice the subtle signs, the plain-clothes federal agents at the back of the room, quietly observing, scanning, recording every move. Their presence was a silent warning, a quiet prelude to the storm she thought she had summoned, but had, in truth, walked into blindly. As she spoke, Grace's words were fierce, sharp, brimming with vindictive satisfaction. But beneath the surface, unspoken, there was tension, a nervousness she couldn't place. Every camera lens, every microphone, every reporter's scribble was feeding into a larger narrative, one she could not yet see. Outside the press hall, the city hummed. Streetlights reflected on rain-slick sidewalks, car horns echoed faintly, and the lives of hundreds carried on oblivious. But inside, a battle of truth and deception played out with stakes far beyond personal revenge. Ryan had set the trap, and Grace, blinded by her ambition and fury, had walked directly into it. The trap was in place, the stage was set, and while Grace believed she controlled the narrative, the truth, patient, relentless, and quietly devastating, waited for its moment. Grace Whitmore stood at the podium, the glare of dozens of camera flashes reflecting off the polished surface of her silk blouse. Confidence radiated from her posture, the tilt of her chin, the precision of every gesture. Her words had been rehearsed countless times, each syllable sharpened like a blade, designed to pierce Ryan Carter's reputation and elevate her own status. She could feel the rhythm of the room, the anticipatory murmurs of reporters, the hum of the microphones, the scent of polished wood and expensive perfume in the air. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm here today to expose the truth about Ryan Carter. The sentence barely left her lips when the doors at the back of the conference hall burst open with a force that made several attendees jump. 2 FBI agents strode in, purposeful and unyielding. They paused at Victor Quain's, seated in the front row, who froze mid-smile, the polished veneer of charm crumbling from his face. Victor Quain, one of the agents announced, voice cutting through the room like a whip. You're under arrest for embezzlement, wire fraud, and conspiracy. A stunned silence settled for a fraction of a second, then chaos erupted. Cameras flashed in rapid succession, journalists shouted questions, and Grace remained frozen, the microphone trembling beneath her grasp. Her carefully constructed world of vindication fractured in an instant. Victor's eyes met hers for a fleeting moment, a mixture of fear and betrayal, before he was led away in handcuffs. The click of the metal echoing through the hall like a final verdict. "This is a setup," Grace screamed, voice sharp and shrill, trembling on the edge of hysteria. "Ryan Carter is the criminal!" He, a reporter, clipboard in hand, raised a question calmly but firmly. "Miss Whitmore, we've just received documents showing that Mr. Kynes approached you with falsified evidence against Mr. Carter. Would you like to comment?" Grace's lips parted, no words emerging. Her face contorted with disbelief, anger, and the creeping realization that the narrative she had so carefully curated was unraveling in real time. I was deceived," she finally stammered. "I'm a victim here." Another journalist pushed further, voice steady but unyielding. "Our sources indicate you agreed to help Mr. Kynes in exchange for damaging information. The FBI has recordings." Grace's carefully applied makeup seemed almost grotesque in its failure to conceal the pale terror rising in her cheeks. The color drained from her face as the room erupted in murmurs and shuffling papers. For the first time in years, she was confronted by the consequences of her own cruelty. The reality of her manipulations reflected back with unflinching clarity. Across town, in a high-rise office overlooking the glittering sprawl of Atlanta, Ryan Carter sat in a quiet conference room with his legal and executive team, the room illuminated by the soft glow of computer screens and city lights. He watched the press conference live, observing every tremor of Grace's hands, every flicker of panic in her eyes. "It's over," Derek said, a note of satisfaction creeping into his voice. "She's finished. There's no coming back from this." Ryan did not smile. He didn't allow himself the small satisfaction of victory. Instead, he felt something closer to pity. A quiet recognition of the hollow life that had driven Grace to cruelty, to manipulation, to public humiliation. "She spent her whole life tearing people down," he said softly, almost to himself. "And now she has nothing left." The room was quiet, the only sound the faint hum of air conditioning and the distant traffic below. Ryan leaned back in his chair, eyes fixed on the screen, absorbing the scene unfolding across the city. Grace's descent was painful to witness, but it was also necessary, a mirror of the consequences she had imposed on countless others. Later that evening, Ryan's phone rang, an unknown number. He answered, cautious but composed. "Ryan, it's me." Grace's voice was raw, cracked with emotion, the carefully maintained veneer finally stripped away. "You planned this. All of it." "I protected myself," Ryan said evenly, the calm in his tone a stark contrast to the tremor in her voice. "There's a difference." A silence hung between them, heavy and charged. "I'll come back from this," Grace whispered, the steel returning faintly to her words. "I always do." "Maybe," Ryan replied. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "Or maybe this is your chance to become someone different. The choice is yours, Grace." He hung up, leaving her in the cold stillness of her apartment, the city's neon glow casting long shadows across her polished floors. For the first time, she was truly alone, not in terms of physical isolation, but in the absence of allies, schemes, and the protective armor of wealth and privilege. But Grace Whitmore was not yet ready to surrender. Even in this darkest moment, when the world seemed to have turned its back on her, when the truth had pierced the fragile shield she had built, she made a call she had vowed never to make. Her fingers shook slightly as she dialed, each press deliberate, carrying with it the weight of desperation, defiance, and a dangerous determination. She reached out to her estranged brother, a man whose connections were whispered about in circles that solve problems permanently. The kind of problems that could erase obstacles with quiet, deadly efficiency. As the line rang, Grace closed her eyes and inhaled deeply, trying to summon the control she had wielded so effortlessly in the past. Yet, beneath the surface, there was fear. A fear she had never truly confronted before. For all her life, she had acted as if she were untouchable. Now, with her empire of lies collapsing around her, she was forced to face the vulnerability she had spent decades hiding. In that moment, alone, standing in the dim glow of her apartment, Grace Whitmore was no longer the woman who had mocked, manipulated, and humiliated. She was something new, raw, exposed, desperate, yet still dangerous. And the next move she would make would either be her redemption or her undoing. 3 weeks slipped by like sand through open fingers, quietly, almost deceptively. The world moved on, as it always did. Headlines shifted to new scandals, new feuds, new stories to devour. Grace Whitmore's downfall became yesterday's obsession, and in its wake, something unexpected happened. Ryan Carter's reputation didn't just recover, it crystallized into something stronger than before. People called him resilient, principled, a leader who had weathered chaos with integrity. Investors returned, employees rallied, and across the Meridian Hotel's network, there was a renewed sense of loyalty. Ryan did not bask in the praise. He accepted it with gratitude, but also with a silent awareness of how fragile reputations and people truly were. He had come to Charleston for something that mattered far more than press releases or public appearances. He wanted to personally thank the staff who had stood by him when the storm hit hardest. Housekeepers, bellmen, kitchen workers, maintenance crews, night shift clerks, the quiet backbone of everything he had built. He greeted them one by one, shaking hands, looking people in the eyes, acknowledging the small gestures of faith they had offered when he'd needed them most. When Elena approached him, she held her hands together tightly, as though anchoring herself against a tide of nerves. "Mr. Carter?" she said softly. "Can I speak to you for a moment?" Ryan gave her his full attention immediately. "Of course, Elena, what's wrong?" Her eyes flicked around the hallway before she leaned in. I need to tell you something. I wasn't sure before, but now I think you should know." Ryan felt a slow chill rise inside him. "Tell me." "A man came to my apartment," she whispered, "3 nights ago. He asked questions about you, where you stay, your schedule, your security. I told him nothing. I swear it, but he kept pressing." A tightness gripped Ryan's chest. "What did he look like?" Elena swallowed, voice trembling. "Tall, maybe a little over 6 feet, bald, and he had a scar. Here." She traced a line from the base of her left thumb to her wrist. Ryan's breath stilled. He knew that description. He had seen it in faded newspaper clippings, in mugshots, in the shadows of a story Grace had tried to bury. Her brother, Theodore Whitmore. The man who went to prison for assault 10 years ago. A man whose violence wasn't impulsive, it was calculated, detached, and purposeful. Ryan forced a steady breath. "Thank you, Elena. You did the right thing." But inside, something dark and cold was spreading. A premonition, a warning. That night, Ryan sat in his office with his head of security. Jackson Reed, a former Marine whose calm in crises had saved Ryan more times than he cared to count. Jackson studied him for a long moment, arms crossed, jaw set. "You look like a man trying to outrun his own thoughts," Jackson noted quietly. Ryan exhaled slowly. "I'm not running." He lifted his gaze, steadying himself. "I won't let fear dictate my life." Jackson nodded once, approval mixed with concern. "Then we prepare." He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "And we don't let you out of sight until this is over." Ryan didn't argue. For once, his instinct for independence felt like a liability. Something was coming. He could feel it. Meanwhile, a different meeting was unfolding outside Atlanta, in a dim motel room that smelled of stale cigarettes and damp carpet. Grace stood by the window, arms wrapped tightly around herself, as though she could hold together the pieces of her crumbling world. Theodore lounged in a chair, a cigarette dangling from his fingers, his expression unreadable. "I'm not asking you to hurt him," Grace insisted, her voice shaking with a mixture of desperation and old resentment. "Just scare him. Make him leave town. Make him disappear from public life." Theodore let out a slow, amused exhale of smoke. "And what's in it for me?" "Full access to my trust fund," she said. The words felt like shards in her throat. $2 million. A slow, reptilian smile curled across Theodore's lips. Consider it done. But Grace didn't know, or didn't care to know, the truth. Theodore never settled for small payouts, and he was deep in debt to men who dealt in shadows and violence. Ryan Carter's company was worth billions. A scare job wouldn't solve Theodore's problems. A kidnapping, however, that was profitable. The next morning, unaware of the trap tightening around him, Ryan visited a youth center he funded in downtown Charleston. It had been built in honor of his father, who grew up just a few blocks away. Inside were bright walls, donated books, and children whose dreams were still unbroken. Ryan read aloud from a book, his voice warm, steady, filling the room with life. The children leaned in closely, hanging on every word. For a few precious minutes, the world felt simple again, human, earnest, innocent. Then his phone buzzed. One glance at the screen sent a jolt through him. A text. Unknown number. Your mother's house in Savannah. Sunset. Come alone, or she pays for your arrogance. His heart slammed against his ribs. The phone shook in his hand. He forced a smile for the kids and excused himself gently, but his composure was slipping with each step. He dialed his mother. No answer. He dialed again. Still nothing. Then he called Jackson. Get to Savannah, Ryan said, voice cracking despite his effort to remain steady. Now. For the first time in his life, Ryan Carter felt truly powerless. Not because of wealth or reputation or risk, but because someone he loved was in danger, and the illusion of control shattered like glass in his hands. Ryan Carter's hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly that his knuckles whitened. The engine roared beneath him, tires gripping the asphalt as he tore down the highway toward Savannah. Each mile brought him closer to the heart of his childhood, yet it also tightened the knot in his chest. The sun dipped low, painting the sky with streaks of crimson and gold, a haunting contrast to the storm of fear and determination inside him. He dialed Jackson again, breath hitching with every impatient second. Anything? We've got eyes on the house, Jackson replied, voice calm but taut. Your mother is inside, appears unharmed. But there's a vehicle parked down the street. 2 men inside. No weapons visible yet. Ryan's jaw tightened. Don't engage. Not until I get there. He gripped the wheel harder, pressing down on the accelerator, each passing sign a blur. Memories of his childhood fluttered him unbidden, the smell of fresh-cut grass, the squeak of his father's sneakers on the driveway as he taught him to shoot hoops, the warmth of his mother's voice calling him home for dinner. Those streets had always felt safe, predictable. Now they were a battlefield. When he arrived, the quiet of the neighborhood was deceptive. The setting sun cast long shadows over familiar porches and oak-lined streets, stretching like fingers across the pavement. Ryan stepped out of the car as instructed, alone, his suit jacket flapping slightly in the breeze. The tension in his chest was almost physical, pressing against him like a vice, yet he forced himself to breathe evenly. From the shadows, Theodore Whitmore emerged, flanked by a thick-necked associate whose posture suggested intimidation and readiness. Theodore's smirk was predatory, his bald head gleaming in the dying light. "Mr. Big Shot himself," Theodore sneered, arms crossed. "My sister said you were smart. Walking into this alone? Not so smart." Ryan's voice was calm, steady, though every nerve in his body hummed with adrenaline. "Your sister didn't tell you to kidnap anyone," he said, his eyes locked on Theodore's. "This is your play, which means she doesn't know. And it means you're desperate." Theodore's smirk faltered slightly, just enough to reveal the edge of uncertainty beneath his bravado. "Shut up," he growled. Ryan took a measured step closer, his voice even but carrying the weight of undeniable facts. "You owe money to the Marchetti family," he said, "about $800,000, from what I hear. You thought you could ransom me and clear your debts. But here's the thing, Theodore ... He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "The Marchettis already know you're here. Because I told them." Theodore's eyes widened, pale in the fading light. A flicker of panic betrayed him. "You're bluffing," he hissed, his jaw tightening. Headlights flared at both ends of the street, piercing through the dim evening like sudden, sharp revelations. Black SUVs rolled to a stop, engines humming with quiet menace. Not police. Not yet. Something else. Ryan didn't flinch. "I made a call," he said softly, almost conversationally. though his words cut through the air like a blade. Turns out the Margettis don't like loose cannons who draw federal attention. You're a liability, Theodore, and they're here to collect. Theodore's associate bolted instantly, leaving Theodore momentarily alone, exposed, his plan unraveling faster than he could comprehend. The panic in his eyes was almost entertaining, if not for the gravity of the situation. Theodore reached for a weapon tucked in his waistband, but Jackson Reed appeared out of nowhere, silent and lethal. In a fluid motion that had been honed through years of marine precision, he disarmed Theodore, pinning him against the hood of one of the SUVs. Theodore screamed, raw, furious, "This isn't over. Grace will." Ryan's voice cut through, cold and measured. "Grace will spend the next 5 years in court," he said, eyes locked on Theodore. "And you'll spend even longer looking over your shoulder." For a moment, the street was silent. The sun dipped below the horizon entirely, leaving shadows that seemed to bow in acknowledgement of the chaos just resolved. Ryan turned away from Theodore, leaving him in the custody of Jackson's team, and walked the few steps to his mother's house. The familiar creak of the front door greeted him. Inside, Lorraine Carter moved with deliberate calm, pouring sweet tea into glass tumblers as if nothing had happened. Her serenity was a balm against the adrenaline still thrumming through his veins. "Mama," he said, voice cracking slightly, "are you okay? Why didn't you answer your phone?" She turned, smiling gently, her eyes holding a mixture of pride and relief. "Baby, I saw those men outside. I also saw Jackson's team in the backyard. I knew you had it handled." She handed him a glass of tea. "Now, sit down. You look like you haven't eaten in days." Ryan laughed, a sound that was equal parts exhaustion and release, a tear threatening to escape but held back by the weight of relief. For the first time in weeks, he allowed himself to feel the vulnerability he had carried silently, the fear that had threatened to crack him. He let it wash over him, then ebb away. His phone buzzed. Derek's name flashed on the screen. Ryan swiped to read the message. "Turn on the news." The television flickered to life. Grace Whitmore was being led into a police station, flanked by officers. The headline blared across the screen, "Socialite arrested in connection with kidnapping plot against hotel CEO." Ryan leaned back in the chair, the tension in his shoulders slowly dissolving. The world felt right again. Not because justice had been served, but because truth had been allowed to unfold. He sipped the sweet tea, warm and grounding, and looked out the window at the Savannah streets he had known as a boy. For once, he allowed himself to believe that even in the darkest hour, courage, integrity, and patience could create light. 6 months had passed since the chaos, the fear, and the moments when Ryan Carter had felt truly powerless. Now, the morning sun bathed Charleston in a golden glow, and Ryan stood at the podium outside the brand-new Ryan Carter Community Center. His gaze swept over the crowd, employees, local community leaders, families, and dozens of people whose lives he had touched directly or indirectly. Among them was Elena, the young housekeeper who had risked everything to tell the truth. Now standing proudly as a supervisor at the Grand Meridian, her face alight with a quiet joy that made Ryan's chest swell. The building itself was a testament to perseverance and the cycles of kindness passed forward. It sat on the same block where his father had spent 30 years cleaning floors, his janitorial duties unacknowledged yet dignified. Inside, classrooms waited for children to learn, workshops for aspiring entrepreneurs, and training spaces where young adults could gain skills that promised a future brighter than the one they might have been handed by circumstance alone. Ryan adjusted the microphone, a small, reflective smile touching his lips. "My father used to say that success isn't about what you have," he began, voice carrying over the hush of the crowd. "It's about what you give. This center exists because someone gave me a chance when I had nothing, and I believe everyone deserves that same chance." His eyes scanned the faces before him, lingering for a heartbeat on Elena, then drifting over to the older members of the community who had silently carried him forward through memories of his father's humility and work ethic. The crowd erupted in applause, and Ryan allowed himself to feel the weight of gratitude pressing gently on his chest. He thought of his father's lessons, how dignity was not something that could be handed out or stolen, only earned and preserved, often in silence. He felt it now in full, a quiet victory that went beyond legal triumphs or headlines, deeper than revenge or vindication. This was a triumph of the human spirit. In the back of the crowd, a figure watched quietly, almost imperceptibly. A woman of age, weariness written into the lines of her face, stripped of the designer clothing and haughty posture that once defined her. It was Vivian Ashford. Her presence was unassuming, tentative even, but her gaze lingered on Ryan with something like reverence tempered by shame. After the ceremony, as volunteers handed out refreshments and children darted through the sunlit courtyard, Vivian approached Ryan. Her voice, when she spoke, was quiet, measured, yet carried an undercurrent of emotion she could no longer hide. "My daughter pleaded guilty," she said. 5 years probation, community service, mandatory therapy. Ryan nodded, his face calm, his eyes reflecting neither triumph nor gloating. "I know," he replied softly. "She's different now," Vivian continued. "Broken in some ways. But maybe that's what she needed, to finally see herself clearly." She hesitated, searching his face for any flicker of judgment. "I don't expect forgiveness, Mr. Carter, for her or for me, but I wanted you to know, I'm selling the family estate. Half the proceeds will go to this center, anonymously." Ryan studied her face, recognizing the same sharp, incisive eyes that had once belonged to a formidable adversary, now softened by a kind of hard-earned wisdom. "Thank you, Mrs. Ashford," he said simply. She nodded once and melted back into the crowd, a quiet acknowledgement passing between them, unspoken but profound. As the day wound down and the sun dipped behind Charleston's rooftops, Ryan found himself on the porch of his mother's house in Savannah, the gentle hum of cicadas and the faint scent of magnolia filling the air. Lorraine joined him, carrying a plate of peach cobbler, her eyes crinkled with pride, her voice warm and steady. "You did good, baby," she said. "Your daddy would be proud." Ryan looked up at the first stars of the evening. The same constellations his father had once pointed out to him as a child, whispering that the world was vast and anything was possible. "I hope so, Mama," he whispered, voice soft with a mixture of relief and longing. "I really hope so." His phone buzzed, and he saw a message from Derek. "Savannah property acquisition finalized. Your vision for the new hotel, the one honoring your father, is approved." Ryan's lips curved into a smile, genuine and unguarded, unlike the practiced smile of a CEO. This was the smile of a boy from Savannah who had refused to let cruelty define him, who had learned that strength was measured not by dominance, but by compassion and perseverance. He typed back a single word: perfect. Across the country, Grace Whitmore sat in a small community center, sorting through donated clothes as part of her sentence. For the first time in her life, she was invisible, unimportant, just another volunteer blending into the background. The sting of her previous arrogance and entitlement gnawed at her, but in the quiet, repetitive motions of folding and stacking, she began, slowly and painfully, to understand what she had stolen from others: their dignity, their peace, their sense of safety. It wasn't redemption, not yet, not fully, but it was a beginning, fragile yet undeniable, a first step towards something more human, more real. Ryan sipped the last of his cobbler, inhaling the warm Savannah night, the fireflies dancing in lazy, golden arcs around the porch. For the first time in months, he allowed himself to simply breathe. The weight of vindication, loss, and fear, finally lifting just enough to feel hope. And in that quiet and that simple moment, he understood that the world could be cruel, but it could also be kind, if only one refused to give up. If you enjoyed this story of courage, justice, and redemption, be sure to subscribe to the channel and follow for more stories that inspire, uplift, and remind us of the strength within every human heart.